Good morning and welcome to this last webinar in the German Norwegian Energy Dialogue webinar series on today's topic, structural change in the European power sector. My name is Hanne-Marit Strand. I work for the German Norwegian Chamber of Commerce, and together with my colleague Tor Christian, I will guide you through today's webinar. The Energy Dialogue is planned together with our partners, the German Embassy in Oslo, the Norwegian Embassy in Berlin, and Innovation Norway. The event is further supported by our partners Agder Energi, DNV, Equinor, Hydro, RWE Renewables, Statkraft, Statnett, and TenneT. In the first 4 webinars in this webinar series, we have discussed the way forward for German-Norwegian energy cooperation. We have had a webinar on bilateral hydrogen cooperation, on the framework for zero emissions, and visions for offshore renewable production. On May 27, Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg and German Chancellor Angela Merkel led the official opening of the NordLink cable, connecting the German and Norwegian power markets. In today's webinar, we will investigate how the changes in the energy system, as discussed in the previous webinars, will affect the power system. We will also have a look into how the NordLink cable facilitates European market integration. Today's webinar is pre-recorded and will be available here also after today. If you have any questions for the speakers, you can use the chat for this, and the speakers will answer them as we go forward.
Now it's time to begin with the first presentation and the first speaker of the day. We have with us Mr. Arndt von Schemde, who is a partner at Thema Consulting. At Thema, he is in charge of model development and the quantitative analysis team. And today, Mr. Schemde will give us a power outlook for Europe, and he will discuss which consequences increased offshore wind and hydrogen production will have for energy systems design. So, Mr. von Schemde, we're very happy to have you with us here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just share my presentation with you. Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present our outlook on the future power sector in Europe. So I'm going to talk about some really fundamental structural changes that we at least expect for the European power sector, and in particular also for Germany and the Nordic market, if we look a little bit into the future. So, but to start with, I think it's very important to remind ourselves that there's a lot of things going on at the moment, in particular on a European level. So you had a while back the European Green Deal, and actually if you look close enough at the Green Deal, it outlines quite a tremendous change of the energy and the power sector looking forward. And one of the key pillars in the whole overall climate strategy is obviously the issue around hydrogen, which I'm going to talk about, and also which is really becoming more and more a key technology in the future, as we see it at least, is offshore technologies. And also in that respect, the European Commission and on the European level, there are a lot of initiatives and discussions about how to facilitate more offshore renewable energy. So you have this whole European context and very ambitious climate targets implied by the Green Deal. And on top of that, you have the national targets. And it is really a lot of movement and a lot of things going on at the moment. So I'm going to take you through a little bit the consequences as we see it for the power sector. To begin with, one really hot topic these days are so-called hybrid offshore assets. What do I mean with that? Hybrid offshore assets are, in a way, a combination where you combine both a wind generation asset with transmission lines to connect not only the wind park to its home market or to one market, but to several markets. So that means you have wind generation combined with transmission capacity that you can utilize if, for example, the wind is not blowing, or subject on how you dimension the transmission lines and the wind parks, maybe you can even utilize it in addition. Subject to the dimensioning of the lines and the wind parks. And I think this is a topic that we will see very soon in the markets. There are still some unanswered questions, which I will get back to. But this is a very interesting concept and a key concept because it both addresses building out more renewable generation, hence supporting the climate agenda, but also allowing for trade between markets and getting the benefits from this increased market integration. And if you look at it, I mean, this is a concept that I think is also necessary in order to facilitate the large volumes of offshore technologies that the EU envisions for the European market by 2050. So this is the first thing. It sounds all like future music, but in fact, there is already such a project in place. It's the Kriegers Flak between Denmark and Germany. And there are currently also a lot of other concepts discussed, like the North Sea Wind Power Hub, the Wind Connector, or for that matter, the Danish energy islands. So if you had gone say 10, 20 years back, this would have been all like future music, but it becomes more and more concrete. And I think we will see a lot of development and changes when it comes to those hybrid offshore assets and building this North Sea offshore grid and also obviously in the Baltic Sea as well. So this is on the hybrid offshore assets, but there's one key thing, I think we will also discuss it later on, and that is one key question is not just how to build it, but also how to do the market design. What I mean is essentially what pricing should you apply to those assets and how shall you actually regulate it? And the key question essentially is whether you say, you have a wind park that say connects, for that matter, Germany and Norway, and this wind park is, for example, located in the German home market zone. Well, does the wind park then see the German prices, or do you make an own price area for it in order to facilitate trade efficiently? And there are some different concepts. It's the home market concept, and then there's another concept, the offshore bidding zone concepts. In the home market concept, you would say the wind park sees the price of the bidding zone, the country the wind park belongs to. In the offshore bidding zone, you get an own price area. Both approaches have redistributional effects, and I think also there are some questions that need to be addressed in order to both facilitate an efficient build-out, but also, very important, to facilitate efficient trade between countries, because that is a key aspect of those hybrid offshore assets, that you allow for efficient trade arrangements. In terms of the other big thing that is currently discussed, there's a lot of discussion on hydrogen. And in fact, hydrogen is one of the key pillars of the EU's climate strategy currently. And there are a lot of national targets now, and ambitious national targets for electrolyzer capacities in different countries. And there are also already quite a lot of projects actually for electrolyzer projects. And we are not there yet that we fulfill the 2030 target on a EU level, but at least there are already quite a lot of projects on its way to produce hydrogen. Now, very quickly to give you a high-level overview of hydrogen, hydrogen has a very long value chain. It is not a new technology in that sense. I mean, but it's a long value chain, and there are challenges and high capital costs as of now along the entire value chain. But the advantage is really that it is very versatile. So you can use it for heating purposes in buildings. You can use it in transport, in cars, in heavy road vehicles and shipping. And also you can use it in industry, both as a feedstock, but also in processes that require such a high degree of heating that you can, for example, cannot electrify those processes. And then also the application of the reuse in the power sector, the so-called gas to power. So it is a very versatile product, a very versatile form of energy. But you need to produce it, you need to transform it, potentially store it, transport it, and there are heavy investments required actually along the entire value chain. Just on a high level, sometimes, there is this discussion about the different colors for hydrogen, what is meant by that. There's essentially the green hydrogen, which essentially produces hydrogen from renewable energy. That means you use electricity from wind or solar to produce hydrogen. That is the so-called green hydrogen. Then you have the gray hydrogen. That is like where you split natural gas and extract and produce hydrogen from that. And then if you do this in combination with the CCS, so because in this process you will also emit CO2, but you can capture the CO2 and store it, then it's a so-called blue hydrogen, which may play a role, at least as a bridge technology, but we come back later to that. Now, I mentioned already that hydrogen is a very versatile form of energy. And if you look at the different sectors, there are already quite a lot of projects going on. So this, again, is also not something that we are talking about in the very, very long term, although it is a long road to really get this cost efficient. But there are already a lot of projects going on that area, which will also help to decrease the cost looking forward. I mentioned it again, in buildings, it's foremost for heating purposes. In the transport, it is a real alternative for long-distance, heavy-duty road vehicles, and also in aviation and also in shipping, it is a viable alternative. Industry I mentioned, in particular also in combination with emission-free steel, it is discussed, and the reuse in the power sector. So it's a wide span of different applications that is relevant for hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is not only something that is discussed in Europe, but worldwide, in particular in Asia. There are also a lot of initiatives going on, and obviously this will also help to decrease costs globally for the different hydrogen technologies and the different elements in the value chain. And I think this is important to notice. The hydrogen technologies are expensive as of today. But if you look back, what happened, for example, to the cost developments for renewables, I think one can be, in a way, also optimistic that once you produce large scale and once you scale up processes, that also here costs will come down. And already now you also have a lot of global initiatives on hydrogen and import of hydrogen, or ammonia for that matter, which is a kind of reprocessed fuel is going on. So we expect that also hydrogen will maybe turn into a kind of global commodity. But when we go back into Europe, what do we think at Thema how things will look like? Hydrogen has one big implication for the power sector, and that is really that the power demand will increase quite substantially. And that you see on the figure on the left, which shows the development of conventional power demand in Central West Europe. From now until 2050, you see a modest increase. That is a light blue area. But then you see the dark blue area. That is the additional power demand that stems from electrolysis and the production of hydrogen within Europe. So this will mean that the power demand increases from around 1,500 terawatt hours as of today to above 3,000. So we are talking about almost a doubling of power demand by 2050, because you use then power to produce hydrogen that then is used in different applications. Now, You see on the right-hand side, on the other hand, the total hydrogen demand and sourcing for CWE, and you see that a lot of the hydrogen that we expect to be available in the European Union, or in this case CWE, stems from green hydrogen. That means you produce the hydrogen with renewable energy resources in Europe, and only a small fraction is imported. It is really such that imports of hydrogen, if it's not by pipelines, but if it's by ships and trucks, is quite expensive. And actually, Europe has quite good renewable resources. You have good conditions for solar in southern Europe, in particular in Spain and Portugal, but also offshore conditions around the UK and the North Sea are actually quite good, so that we think that you can also cost efficiently produce hydrogen in Europe, for that matter. Just as a side note, only 5% of the overall hydrogen that is produced with power will be reused in the power sector. So really, most of this hydrogen is applied outside the power sector and increases demand for power. This also means for Europe quite a tremendous change in the build-up of renewables. So you see here our illustrations for the future generation mix towards 2050 for the Nordic market. On the left, in the middle, you have Central West Europe, and then on the right-hand side, you have Germany. Now, there are two technologies that we really think will be key. The one, in particular for the Nordic, will be offshore wind, where we see quite a large potential and a significant build-out in the years to come, in particular for Norway, also after the onshore build-out is now much more difficult. We see that a lot of renewables will go towards the offshore sector. And in CWE, you have also offshore, in particular UK and the countries with good offshore locations. We see a tremendous build-out of offshore resources, also in forms of hybrid offshore assets. But also PV plays a key role because PV has become also very, very cheap and continues to do so. For Germany, also here, offshore and PV will take a key role. But one thing you notice is that the total generation is below the actual demand for power. So Germany will become a net importer for power in the future as we see it. And that has to do that there are a lot of resource restrictions in Germany. It's a highly densely populated area with limited renewable potential that results from a lot of restrictions. So Germany will become an importer, at least in our base scenario, which I think also opens for opportunities for the Nordic market, which I come back to later. Now, before I conclude very quickly, the hydrogen is also very important for the build-out of renewables, because there's a fruitful interplay between those two markets, because renewables, the hydrogen sector, the electrolysis, kicks typically in when you have excess of renewable generation and low power prices. This is where the electrolysis becomes profitable. And this obviously then increases the prices somewhat. And you have this dynamic between the hydrogen sector and the power sector. And this dynamic helps to also increase the so-called capture prices for renewables, and helps to increase what volumes you can build out, because obviously you need flexibility in the system if you want to include the degrees of renewables in the system that I mentioned. Before I conclude, it's not only hydrogen and offshore. A lot of other technologies are also needed in the long-term energy transition. We talked about renewable generation. Distributed generation, so-called prosumers, are going to be important, but also not forget CCS and bio-CCS, and also negative emissions in form of direct air carbon capture and storage will probably play a vital role, because some of the industry sectors cannot decarbonize, and that means you need negative emissions. And in that respect, bio-CCS or direct air carbon capture is a viable technology to address this. Batteries will play an important role. New forms of flexibility like compressed air energy storage, but also conventional flexibility in form, for example, of hydro or pumped hydro will play an important role. And obviously interconnectors, new interconnectors, either in form of hybrid assets or classical interconnectors, I think are needed. And then also on the demand side, I think additional forms of flexibility are needed to make such a system work. So it's not just that one technology is a big savior for the sector. Very quickly, to round up, what does it mean now for Norway and Germany? So I had some hypotheses. As I mentioned, Germany has restricted or limited renewable resource potential. Norway is well positioned in that respect, and obviously Norway can, in that respect, help the European, but also the German energy transition by utilizing its renewable energy potential. Trade and exchange are going to be important. I think Norway can contribute to this transition either in the form of new interconnectors, but also hybrid offshore assets, where you can then both utilize offshore resources, but also flexibility via available trade capacities. Also in the hydrogen sector, I think Norway can play an important role, also as a producer of hydrogen. So in that respect, more like talking about molecule export as opposed to power exports, because, concerning blue hydrogen, I think blue hydrogen can be a bridge technology and can play a role in the future. Having said that, it depends also on the public perception and acceptance in Europe, because there are some voices out there that say, oh no, we want only green. And it is a very political discussion, so we need to see where this goes. In terms of flexibility, Nordic hydropower, I'm quite sure, can play quite an important, significant role in the future. Other forms of flexibility will also be needed, but I think Nordic hydropower will still be strong and provide flexibility also in the long term. And the last point in terms of markets, I think what is really needed is clever and transparent market design, in particular when you talk about hybrid offshore assets, for example. And I think sometimes that Norway is a little bit more on the forefront of thinking good market design. And I think also here Norway can actively contribute to the debate of how you should design markets around, for example, new technologies. And with this, I think I can conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arndt von Schemde, for this power outlook for Europe. We look forward to meeting you again in the panel discussion afterwards, where we'll dive deeper into some of the topics. Cross-border activities play a crucial role in order to make the European energy system more integrated and more sustainable. We will now continue with a deeper dive into one of the central German-Norwegian projects over the last few years. The NordLink cable is called the Green Link for exchange of German wind power with Norwegian hydropower. We are very happy to have two of the project leaders involved in the NordLink project here with us today. Bjørn Bakken is Project Director for Market and Operations for the NordLink and NSL interconnectors at Statnett. Melanie Vasold is working as a Project Manager for Market and Operations for the NordLink interconnector at TenneT. Melanie and Bjørn, welcome. Please go ahead when you are ready.
Yes, thank you, Hanne-Marit, for this very nice introduction. And also good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome from my side to this webinar. Today, I and my colleague Bjørn, we want to give you some insights into the why, how, and what of NordLink, also called the Green Link, as Hanne-Marit just said, because it is an important building block of the European energy transition. So I will show you my slides and start my presentation. So when trial operations started on 9th of December 2020, NordLink established the first direct connection between Norway and Germany. And this new interconnection generates socioeconomic benefits across borders. So it helps to stabilize power prices and it improves market efficiency. NordLink connects the hydropower system of Norway and the German power system, where the shares of wind and solar energy continue to increase further while coal is phasing out. And TenneT and Statnett can now, with NordLink, better match demand for and supply of electricity. Well, and how does this happen? So when there's a surplus of wind energy in Germany, this can be exported to Norway via NordLink. And in those times, the water reservoirs in Norway can work as a natural storage for energy by keeping the water in the reservoir. And similarly, when there's surplus hydro generation, this can be exported from Norway back to Germany when there's low wind generation. And this improves the security of supply in both countries, which is important, for example, especially during dry and cold seasons in Norway. And NordLink also facilitates the integration of more renewable energy in both countries and will thus help to reduce CO2 emissions and also to reach our climate goals by enabling increased production and consumption of renewable energy, both in Norway and in Germany. But all these benefits cannot simply be realized by just laying a cable in the ground and connecting it to the onshore grid. It requires a bit more. And that is why next to the construction project, we had our own market design and system operations project to integrate NordLink into the European day-ahead and intraday markets. So we designed concepts for the utilization of the link. We transferred this into processes for our control center colleagues, and we implemented necessary IT tools. And by doing this, we can now, after the asset has been constructed, also ensure a reliable, safe, and efficient operation of the interconnector. And of course, we always bear in mind and respect the regulatory and legal framework. So in order to realize this huge project, many people from various disciplines, they all worked together hand in hand over more than 5 years, so that in the end, we finally could deliver the cable in time. And we now want to show you a short movie so that you also can get an impression of the most important milestones of our project. And afterwards, my colleague Bjørn Bakken will take over and give you some more insights about the project and the construction phase.
NordLink, the green link. 623 kilometers through the North Sea, the fjords, and over land. $5.7 million hours of work on land and at sea. 5 years under construction. Completed on schedule and with reliable technical quality. The NordLink success story. The signing of the contracts by TenneT, Statnett and the KfW. Construction starts on the converter station in Tonstad. Groundbreaking ceremony and symbolic cable pulling in Vilster. Start of cable installation in Follesfjord and construction of the 53-kilometer direct current overhead line. Underpassing the North Sea dike using cable protection tubes. Pulling in of the subsea cable in Follesfjord. "14 transformer transports in Norway and Germany with a combined weight of 4,200 tons. Archaeological finds along the underground cable route. Completion of the converter station in Tonstad. Laying of the 54 kilometers of land cable in Germany. completion of the laying of the subsea cable, crossing of the Kiel Canal, and the first transmission tests under trial operation from December onwards. NordLink delivers 1,400 megawatts of transmission capacity, as much as 1.5 power plants. NordLink will supply 3.6 million households with electricity from renewable energies. NordLink for Germany, Norway and Europe. To protect our climate and the future of our planet. For our children and for our grandchildren. NordLink, clean energy for the world of tomorrow. We will link Europe.
Thank you, Melanie, for this good introduction. I will now dig a little bit deeper into the technical elements around the NordLink Interconnector. This is a high voltage direct current link that goes between the municipality of Sirdal in Norway. The station is Tonstad, Ertsmyra in Norway, and then down to Wilster in Schleswig-Holstein in Germany. The capacity of the link is 1,400 megawatts, and it consists of 514 kilometers sea cable, 55 kilometers of land cable on the German side, and 54 kilometers of DC overhead line in Norway. So this is currently the world's longest DC interconnector. The owners of the project are Statnett, the Norwegian TSO, with 50%. It's TenneT, the Dutch and German TSO, with 25%, and it's KfW, a German investment bank, owning 25%. A few glimpses, you have already seen the video now, but a few glimpses of the work that has been done here. On the left-hand corner, upper left, you see an impression of the cable that is used for this, where you see all of the different layers here of protection and armoring of this cable that is led down on the seabed. In the middle upper, we see the converter station built in Wilster in Germany. And on the left-hand corner bottom, we also see the barge that was used to bring the cable onshore in Wilster. This is a very challenging area with shallow waters, so we can't sail the big vessels into that area to lay the cable. So we had to transfer the cable onto a custom-built barge and bring it onshore in the Wilster area here. Up to the right-hand corner, you see the valve holes in one of the converter sites, the valves hanging from the roof here, and with the cooling systems surrounding them. The bottom right shows the converter station in Ertsmyra in Tonstad. A little bit more on how we utilize the link. The capacity, as I already said, is 1,400 megawatt receiving end. If you're very curious and look at the Nordpool website, you may sometimes see a higher number than 1,400, but that is due to the losses in the interconnector. In order to deliver 1,400 megawatt in the receiving end, we need to put a little bit more power into the sending end to cover losses. So sometimes the number is higher than 1,400, but not much. As Melanie already said, the commercial operation started on the 8th of December last year, but this was still a trial operation phase, so it means we are still inside the project phase, but we allow the markets to start using the interconnector to check that everything is working according to plan. And basically, all available capacity will always be offered first to the day-ahead market, to the single day-ahead coupling in Europe. After the day-ahead market has cleared, we also offer unallocated capacity, not used by the day-ahead market, can then be offered to the intraday market, ex-bid afterwards, and also trades in the opposite direction may occur in the intraday market. So the trial operation went on till the middle of March, and the 31st of March 2021, the project was formally completed, and the owners took over the assets from the construction companies. The market itself didn't notice this handover because the commercial operation was still being run, but for the project, that was the major milestone to finalize the construction phase. There are still a few open bullets in this project. For instance, the question of long-term transmission rights has not been fully finalized. This is not offered in NordLink for the time being, but there is still a dialogue and a discussion between the regulatory authorities in Norway and Germany whether we are going to offer long-term rights or not. And finally, balancing products will also be made available once the new European balancing platforms become available between the Nordic and the continental synchronous systems in the next 1 or 2 years. In the daily operation, we do a routine calculation of all of our borders every day to see how much can we offer to the market in each hour for the coming 24 hours. And then there's a formalized process between the TSOs where the lowest value would set the availability of this link in the market for the coming day. And this graph on this slide may be a little difficult to read on the screen for you, but it shows an overview of how the link has been utilized since the start in early December last year and up to the beginning of May this year. And you will notice here the blue are the capacity offered to the market. Positive values are exports from Norway to Germany. Negative values are exports from Germany to Norway. And in the first 4 weeks of this trial operation, we limited the capacity of the link to only 50% to make sure that if something wasn't working properly with the market systems, we didn't have so high consequences for the systems if something went wrong. Then from the beginning of January, we generally had a maximum full capacity on the link, but there was always a daily process where you see limitations in what is available here. There's also some white areas here. We had some outages here in the early beginning of the trial operation, and then at the end of trial operation, we disconnected the link for a little bit more than a week. At the end of and the end of March, do some final adjustments of the technical systems here before we enter the commercial phase again in April. Red curves are the values taken by the day-ahead market, and blue curves are the final flow, including intraday. So you can also see here in the beginning of February, there were periods where the day-ahead market didn't, due to the price in Norway and Germany being very equal, the red curve is mostly zero, so the market didn't take the link. But the blue curves show that there was still some intraday trading on top of that day-ahead, the lack of day-ahead flow. So this is a very, very, very simplified glimpse into how the utilization of NordLink has been now since the beginning in last December. And with this, I'll give the word back to my colleague Melanie to continue this presentation.
So after building interconnectors, the next big step are now cross-border offshore energy systems. And the EU here has ambitious strategies for offshore wind, and many projects are expected in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea. So the idea is now to connect all these wind farms to different countries, and at the same time to set up a direct interconnection between these countries, to have combined benefits of interconnection and of offshore wind. And here especially a coordinated planning, standardization, and technology development are key issues. And both TenneT and Statnett are heavily involved in this work to help this improve even further. The challenge hereby, however, is that the number of involved member states then automatically increases, and thus also the complexity of the regulatory framework. So this is why we think that member states should ensure a close international coordination. They should provide aligned long-term policy targets and also jointly provide a reliable regulatory framework that addresses the roles and responsibilities of the involved parties. We need to design a robust market setup. We need to define the allocation of rights and duties of these new common infrastructures. And finally, and maybe also most importantly, we need to find the best locations for these new common offshore projects. And by doing so, we can then help to make the European energy system more and more integrated and more sustainable. So, we hope that you could gain some insights into NordLink and also into our Interconnector business. And thank you very much for listening to our presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Melanie Vasold and Bjørn Bakken. Ms. Vasold, unfortunately, you cannot join the panel discussion later on, but we have one question before we move on. We've heard about grid capacity and bottlenecks in Germany affecting the profitability of the NordLink cable. From a TSO perspective, can you say something about how you see that this can be handled in the years to come?
Thank you, Hanne-Marit, for this interesting question. First, building interconnectors is truly an important step for the European market integration, and it is like one of the first steps. And yes, building more interconnectors then, of course, also requires more grid expansion onshore, so that we can then also benefit from the full potential of our interconnectors and of the cross-border energy exchanges. And at the same time, we also want to allow for the infeed and the transport of renewable energy onshore. So we need to combine everything. And here, indeed, big projects like, maybe you also know the SuedLink project in Germany, but also many other smaller onshore grid investments, they come into play and have a very important role here. So TenneT is working at full speed on enhancing the existing grid, but also building new electricity grids, both AC and DC. If necessary, then also remedial actions like redispatching and counter-trading will, of course, be applied. But I want to a little bit broaden up the focus here, because I think that in addition to interconnectors, also the whole energy transition and the additional electricity demand that is created in transport, in heating, and in industry, this all leads to constantly raising transmission demands, and it requires massive grid expansions, not only in Germany, but I think across Europe. So in addition, we as TenneT also look for innovative solutions to optimize the use of the existing electricity grid in order then to reduce the need for even further grid expansion and further redispatching. And here, concepts, for example, like the control room of the future, flexibility markets, the bidding zone review, hydrogen, but also sector coupling are important topics that TenneT is seriously looking into and is engaged with.
Thank you so much, Melanie Vasold, for this answer and for participating here today. Let us now go on from NordLink and look forward into the future. The EU puts great emphasis on offshore wind to achieve its net zero target by 2050 and aims to achieve at least 60 gigawatt by 2030 and 300 gigawatt by 2050, and that is from the current level of about 12 gigawatt. This necessarily also involves a large build-out of power grids and infrastructure. If we take the EU strategy for offshore renewables into account, this also involves more cross-border cooperation and interconnectedness. How we plan for this is the topic of our next speaker. Michiel Muller is Program Director for the North Sea Wind Powerhub program on behalf of TenneT. Michiel Muller joined TenneT in 2018 to lead this program aimed to facilitate the large-scale rollout, connection and integration of North Sea offshore wind. Mr. Muller, we are very happy to have you here. Please go ahead when you are ready.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the main findings from the North Sea Wind Powerhub program over the last year, as well as our plans for the near future. Let me start at the beginning, or rather, let me start at the end, because that's where we usually start our analysis. Is okay, where do we need to go to? And we need to go to a net zero environment in 2050, which has huge implications for the way we look at our energy system and the role of that infrastructure. It's really important to realize that in transforming that energy system and in introducing large shares of renewables into that energy system, we lose a part of the dispatchable power of the way that we can control our power into the system by turning on or turning off energy generation. And we need to find other ways to ensure that we can use that power effectively, which has all to do with flexibility. And we'll come back to that one. Another thing which is really important to consider or to realize is that to be able to integrate all that offshore wind power, as mentioned in the introduction, almost 300 gigawatts by 2050 into our onshore energy system, we need to make sure that we can balance that power distribution as best as we can between the different sectors of our region. And especially between Northwest Europe on the one hand, UK, Ireland, and Scandinavia, that's where we need to increase the interconnection capacity between those different areas significantly, because they have quite different energy generation mixes, which is mutually beneficent, as well as, of course, they will experience different weather patterns, and hence will smoothen out some of that irregularity of generation of new, renewable power. So especially on the sort of the wet interfaces or the wet interconnectors, the interconnectors that go across the North Sea, significant expansion is required in connection to the rollout of offshore wind. And then lastly, in terms of challenges, we need to really accelerate the deployment of offshore wind. With our current trajectory, we will not be even close to 300 gigawatts of offshore wind in 2050. So hence we have to find out new ways and really a step change in our way of approaching the development and deployment of offshore wind to make those targets. Just as a short introduction, North Sea Wind Power Consortium is a combination of 3 TSOs, Energinet, a Danish electricity and gas TSO, Gasunie, a Dutch gas TSO, which also has assets in Germany, and Tenet, a cross-border TSO between the Netherlands and Germany, with TSO responsibility of the electricity grid, both in the Netherlands and Germany. These 3 companies have joined forces a couple of years ago out of a really societal responsibility to proactively consider what it means, this massive rollout of offshore wind, for integrating and being able to integrate that into the onshore power system. And in our first analysis, something we published in 2019, we believe that the way to go to do this in an affordable and secure manner is by developing a series of what we call hub and spoke projects to connect all that offshore wind and bring it to the different countries, with the ambition to realize the first one in the early 2030s. And that is really an ambitious next step. So if we see, and maybe focus first on the right picture, we see, of course, a change in the way offshore wind is being developed, starting off from relatively small scale, AC connected, close to shore types of wind farms. Wind farms are getting bigger. Distances to shore become longer, so we need to go to DC, as you see, for instance, in the German sector, because of the distances to shore. Still radially connected, so still connected only to one country. Then there's the first projects that are being either developed or even already constructed, which show hybrid assets combining interconnection and transmission capacity on the DC side, to what we then call hub and spoke projects, where we consider hubs of around 10 to 16 gigawatts of capacity, connecting offshore wind from a large area to a single hub, collecting the power at the hub, converting it to DC levels, and then bringing it back to the shores in the different countries, and then providing both the connection and the interconnections. And finally, in the longer-term future, we also see it's quite likely that there will be power-to-gas conversion at the hub using the relatively efficient and cheaper transport of energy through pipelines, while also, in that sense, hopefully minimizing sort of the amount of cables and pipelines that is required to connect all that power to shore. But that really requires us to take a different approach, which means that it should be based on a transnational approach. Look at the North Sea as one area, and look together from all the neighboring countries on how to efficiently utilize those resources, taking also into account all the other stakeholders, including the environmental side with respect to the North Sea. We definitely need to do this in a hybrid fashion, so combining transmission and connection infrastructure, as it provides a more efficient and cost-effective way to connect and integrate offshore wind. And increasingly, we need to consider system integration, cross-sector conversion of energy to provide flexibility to the power system, but also to decarbonize the non-power sectors, or what is called the hard-to-abate sectors, those sectors which cannot be electrified and need another way of CO2-free sources. In 2020, we went through what we call the pre-feasibility phase, where we've looked into sort of 4 different areas. First of all, system integration, and we'll spend a little bit more time on that one in the slides to come, where we basically have demonstrated in various studies that the future energy system in Northwest Europe really needs a deep system integration to provide an affordable but also secure way of both decarbonizing the power sector, but also decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sectors. But to do so, we also need to find ways to differently look at the assessment of projects. So basically, to determine whether a project should be built or not, usually what's called a CBA, a cost-benefit analysis, is done and compared to alternative ways to realize the same goal. The current way that we apply those principles is no longer really adequate for a hub-and-spoke type of project, given the size, which means that there are impacts really deep into the grid, which need to be also taken into account, but also because of the cross-sector and cross-nation approach that is undertaken. We've spent quite a bit of time on the technical feasibility side of things. We do not see really big showstoppers there, although there's still a lot of work to be done. And then there's still a lot of work to be done also on the policy side, as our current regulatory framework and market design will not be sufficient to support investments across all the stakeholders and to sort of automatically get us into Paris. We really need to adapt those instruments to be able to have stakeholders securely invest in this direction. We also try to be pragmatic, right? On one hand, we have a clear vision on the longer-term future, but we also have to work with the systems as they are today because of the time. There's a lot of work to be done until 2050, and these projects take quite a bit of time to develop. So we need to find ways to do that as quickly and as pragmatically as possible. And one of the things that we realized is that for this very first hub and spoke project in the early 2030s, we need to find ways to align as much as possible with the national perspective, the national targets, the national grid planning process as they are today, because we cannot change the whole system overnight. And hence, the current focus for the first project is very much on the distributed hub, with multiple smaller and smaller still very big, so still 4 or 6 gigawatts hubs in the different EEZs, and then having interconnections between those hubs to provide the overall connection and interconnection capacity required. In the longer term, we can still go to the more centralized hubs, developing additional benefits from scale. But again, the first step really needs to be a little bit more pragmatic there in terms of what is achievable on the shorter term. Then a few words on system integration. As indicated, very important aspect for the longer term integration of offshore wind into the energy system. Currently, energy sectors work largely in parallel, more or less in silos. Coordination is starting up. You see alignment between N2E and N2G to start considering how sort of joint grid planning should look like. But there's still a way to go to make sure that that becomes really an integrated grid planning process, which is required to deal with the increasing challenge of the mismatch between energy supply and demand over time. We also see significant cost reductions in renewables, especially in offshore wind, and we will need to see the same thing in electrolysis to enable that system integration in the longer term. As indicated, we move from dispatchable power to non-dispatchable power to power which is produced by weather rather than by our own will. And hence, we need to find ways to provide flexibilities on all timescales. At every second in the power system, demand and supply need to be aligned. For the shorter timescales, the grid is essential, batteries are essential, and there's a couple of other components. But for the longer periods, and then you're talking about days, weeks, and even months, you really need to consider conversion to gas, and in this case, hydrogen is the most prominent and seems to have the highest probability of being the chosen carrier, because it allows us to store that energy and use it later. And that further integration of energy sectors, so between the gas sector and the electricity sector, is really vital to be able to integrate these vast amounts of power against the lowest system cost and hence the cost for society. In that space, also green hydrogen production domestically, so within the Northwest Europe, plays a key role. In the longer term, you may expect that it also becomes a global commodity, but certainly in the first decades, also domestically produced green hydrogen will provide a key role in both providing the flexibility and in decarbonizing the other energy sectors. So as already mentioned, so there's the two key components for hydrogen in that future system is providing the longer-term flexibility, but also to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors. And of course, at the same time, it will reduce the curtailment of renewable energy, which is basically a loss, and also reduces grid congestion in the longer run, and hence the need to continue to expand the electricity grid beyond a certain point. Aside from these more technical topics, we do quite a bit of work on the policy topics, as indicated, the market setup and the regulatory framework. We do this by developing different discussion papers which outline the different options, but also the needs for that future energy system, but also to analyze the impact it will have, any choice in this area, the impact it will have on the different stakeholders. And then we discuss, are in the process of discussing many of these topics also with the ministries to find a way to gradually adapt and change some of these aspects to facilitate the longer term rollout. You can find these reports on the internet, on our website. Technical feasibility, as indicated, we do not see real showstoppers. It looks like we can basically realize the first project based on today's technologies. Most components are technically mature. There are some significant steps still required, especially in electrolysis, whereas the basic components for electrolysis are mature and technically well developed. They are not at the scale that we need. So to develop those to a gigawatt scale still requires significant efforts to make that into a technically mature and reliable product. In this year, we are in the midst of what we call the feasibility phase, where we have zoomed in on a limited number of possible configuration of the first hub-and-spoke project. We will continue to look into system integration, with also looking more detailed at what industrial clusters could mean in terms of flexibility for the system. We will apply the suggested adaptations of the CBA framework to these case studies to analyze the cost and benefits relative to more traditionally, more nationally, more radially, less integrated ways to develop offshore wind. We will continue on the technical feasibility side, especially also on the foundation side, to understand which foundation in which location can support the infrastructure that we need. And we will continue our discussions on regulatory market design frameworks and extend that also to consider investment framework, governance models, but also the whole regulation around power tax, which will be required in the longer term. And with that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you these results. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and you can find many of the reports on our website.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Muller, for your introduction to the North Sea Wind Power Hub. You will be staying with us for a few questions, and we also bring Mr. Arndt von Schemde back to the stage, as well as Mr. Bakken from Statnett. And I suppose we could begin by touching upon the NordLink topic again. First question to you, Mr. Bakken. I saw on the 27th of May, on the inauguration of the NordLink cable, that your CEO, Hilde Tonne, said that the next step for Statnett is to develop offshore grids. And this would necessarily involve more cooperation with TSOs and other actors from different countries who have, to some extent, different regulatory regimes as well as different working cultures. So now, having completed NordLink and having completed it successfully, What do you think are the main takeaways, your learnings from the project when it comes to engaging with another partner and working with them personally and not really knowing them that well in advance?
Well, I think a key issue is to meet your partner with openness and respect, because you are meeting people from, as you said, different cultures, different backgrounds, different regulatory regimes. And one thing is to put together a construction project or a construction team that is going to build a common product or a common asset. But when you are, like we have done in this project, we have built a common operative procedures and market design between two countries and two companies. You don't really build a common product. You build bridges between the different procedures, because we aren't changing, Statnett aren't changing our IT systems. We aren't changing our procedures to operate NordLink. We integrate NordLink into our other assets and our daily operations procedures, and that's the same that TenneT has to do. So it's very much about making deals, finding compromises, and finding solutions that work for both parties. So one single party can't always be right and can't always make the decision. You have to give a little and you have to take a little. So to be open for your partner's interests and your partner's position is extremely important here. And we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the project. Luckily, at that time, we were allowed to meet physically. So we had common project meetings with the teams, brought them together, had discussions, argued, disagreed in the meetings. Then we went out afterwards having a nice dinner together and made jokes and told stories. And then we met again the day after and continued arguing about the solution. So I think this building social capital, it's almost like a marriage. You need to understand your partner and find compromises that will work. And when you have social capital, you can also disagree with somebody without being enemies. And to make this, let's say, back and forth negotiations work smoothly in a team, in a project like this, has been extremely important for us to achieve the goals we have reached here in time. And if you think in the future now with multinational and multi-corporal cooperation on offshore grids, the complexity would increase exponentially with the number of partners. So it's even more important to have this good working relation with your partners and be open for compromises. Always look for common solutions in the middle here. Not stand very strongly on your single position from the beginning.
And thinking in a more general sense, why are these kinds of international cooperation projects and partnerships important?
Well, they are so huge that I don't think a single company or a single country can do this on their own. One thing is the financial cost and the financial size, but you're crossing borders, you're crossing geographical borders, you're crossing the regulatory borders, and you're crossing authorities, offshore, onshore. There's a number of parties that not only have an interest, but they also have a legal right to interfere here. So I don't think it will be possible to continue in even more size and complexity without creating these good international cooperations on multiple levels.
Thanks a lot. And speaking of international projects, Mr. Muller, the North Sea wind power program started out with a Dutch, Danish, German perspective. But why stop there? Which kinds of benefits do you see by also expanding the connection to Norway or to UK for that matter?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we see as a consortium great benefits actually to expand the cooperation to other countries. But maybe first also reflect on what Mr. Bakken told just now. I fully recognize sort of the the importance of building the team across those borders. As a consortium, we come from different countries, different cultures, and it takes a while. It takes a while before you talk the same language and you have the same idea about the goal. So while at the same time there's a clear need to expand towards Norway and the UK, given sort of the different energy mixes in the different countries and the benefits of that those interconnectors can bring, we also need to take that step by step and invest in the cooperation and in the collaboration to understand why are we doing this and how can we do this, and really appreciate, as indicated, the different cultures and the different backgrounds that people come from.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Muller. And Mr. von Schemde, how do you see Norway engaging on this topic? And what would be the benefit from a Norwegian perspective? And what kinds of implications would it have for Norway?
No, I mean, obviously for Norway, the advantage of extending via hybrid offshore assets is you utilize both the offshore potential, but you can also contribute by trade and hence utilize the hydro resources that are located in Norway. So you get both sides of, in a way, both advantages. Whether they connect to the one offshore hub, to another one, to both, how complex the grid in the North Sea will develop, that remains to be seen. But there is obviously this tremendous advantage that you can both utilize renewable resources in combination with trade, in combination with the flexibility that Norway can provide in both directions. And I think that's an obvious advantage in that respect.
Thank you. If we continue with you, Mr. Muller, from a TSO point of view, can you say something about how to facilitate more hybrid projects, for example, in terms of market design?
Yeah, so I think I think we first need to have a common starting point on why are we doing hybrid projects, and I think there is a clear rationale for that. It's simply more efficient and cost effective to combine connection and interconnection infrastructure. So I think that should be the starting point. That's from a societal point of view, there's a clear benefit of going through the trouble, because it's additional trouble, to build hybrid projects. And then the market design basically follows that. It's not like, it should be the other way around. So then we should consider what market design actually helps build and operate that facility, and how does it affect the different stakeholders. So clearly, of course, there is a transfer of revenue when you start to use hybrid projects between TSOs on the one hand and wind farm developers on the other hand, and we just have to recognize that and be transparent about it and make sure that the incentives are correctly distributed amongst the different stakeholders to make it happen to, in the end, develop that benefit of reduced costs for society from those hybrid assets.
And also for you, Mr. von Schemde, I know that you have done some analysis on how the market for offshore hybrid projects could be set up. What do you see as important, both to facilitate more projects and to ensure that the system also works in the long term?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, we did this study for the European Commission on hybrid offshore assets and the market design. I mean, the key aspect is really what also Herr Muller said. You need a market design that enables the efficient trade. That is on the one hand, that you really need to say, okay, how can we utilize the trade efficiencies that are available best for the markets to get an efficient solution. That is one aspect, but you also have you need to incentivize new investments. And those two are not necessarily in line with each other. What you see is that the overall benefits of all hybrid offshore assets, if you take the sum of benefits of parks, of wind parks and lines, that is the same, independent of the market design. But then the market design you choose is a redistribution between TSOs and wind operators. And for wind operators that need to invest, obviously some kind of low risk is important. And the one market design may imply a higher market risk than the other one. So I think we need to have also discuss some potential redistribution between the different parties in order to both have an efficient trade. And I think in terms of that, the so-called offshore bidding zone arrangement is probably the preferred solution, in my opinion, because it really gives the efficient trade incentives. But you may need some redistribution afterwards in order to mitigate the risks that wind investors may have, because they need a long-term perspective, and in that respect, they don't like risk. So, but I think this can be solved, to be honest. I think this is a little bit tricky. The devil is in the detail, but it's not an unsolvable problem. So I think I'm quite positive that it will be sorted out.
And Mr. von Schemde, you mentioned it already in your presentation, the role of hydrogen. In the years ahead, more hydrogen will be coming both on and offshore. And how can we plan the power system while also taking the hydrogen and power-to-X infrastructure into account? I suppose this question goes both to you and Mr. von Schemde as well as Mr. Muller. So you may choose who should answer first.
Yeah, maybe since you addressed me first, I can start. It's a very good question. To be honest, I think when we are in 2050, the power system will look very different from what we anticipate as of now. So we don't have the crystal ball that we can look into. But I think for hydrogen, hydrogen is as of now quite expensive. You need for the years to come some support mechanisms to facilitate the build out, to get costs under control, and again having a long-term planning perspective for investors, I think, is quite central in that respect, so that people are willing to invest and invest in the correct technologies. And then with that respect, market design support mechanisms are obviously key for the years to come.
Yeah, maybe I can build onto that one. So again, maybe starting from sort of the functional need, if we go to a net zero power system or even energy system, hopefully by 2050, we will need significant system integration or power conversion or hydrogen, whatever is going to be the product, but some way to store basically electricity and distribute it in a different way. So it's a necessity. So even if the costs don't come down, it's a necessity to make it happen somehow. So I think that is a starting point. And the other thing, if you really think about planning, I think what we increasingly realize is that our planning horizon should be further extended, that 10 years is probably not sufficient, given sort of the timeline required to realize these massive projects. And that we need to align the planning of the gas and the electricity system to the power system. As because of system integration, these two are going to be codependent. So we need to start integrating, and that's actually something which is starting to happen slowly between NSOE and NSOG in terms of aligning those perspectives, but really start to think about planning in an integral system, energy system way, rather than in separate silos between the power sector on the one hand and the rest of the energy system on the other hand, because they will become highly codependent towards 2050. And actually, I think that will become relevant even earlier than many of us think, in terms of that already in the early 2030s, we will need significant power-to-X conversion capacity to be able to integrate efficiently all that power into our grids. Okay. Just grid expansion will not do the trick. It's still required, but it's not the only thing that is required.
Thank you, all three of you, for joining this very interesting panel discussion. We have to round up. Thanks a lot to the audience for following us today, and thank you to the speakers for sharing your knowledge and thoughts on this very important topic for the European ambitions to be realized. Thank you also to our partners, Agder Energi, DNV, Equinor, Hydro, RWE Renewables, Statkraft, Statnett and TenneT. This was the last session of the German Norwegian Energy Dialogue webinar series. Before we say goodbye, I would like to inform you that our partner, Innovation Norway, will be continuing the bilateral energy dialogue this autumn, so stay tuned. If you missed some of the webinars or would like to see them again, you may find them in this YouTube channel. And by that, it is time to say thank you yet again, and bye for now, and I really hope to see you again next year, and then hopefully not on a screen, but face to face. Thank you and goodbye.